Greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, Robert Meyer Burnett. I invite you to watch and listen to the Designing Hollywood podcast, brought to you by Martika Ibarra and the great, legendary Hollywood costume designer, Marilyn Vance. I am afforded the wonderful opportunity of co-hosting the show. If you are interested in the magic of Hollywood, the design of Hollywood, the clothes of Hollywood, watch the Designing Hollywood podcast, available wherever you get your podcasts from, or find the video version on the John Campea YouTube channel. That's right, the Designing Hollywood podcast. Why would you ever want to miss it? Especially if you love the movies.
Robservations with Robert Meyer Burnett.
Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your master of fun and wonder, your viceroy of verisimilitude, your sommelier of sci-fi and cinema, your evangelist of the imagination, and the as-yet undefined existential Mr. Rogers. That's right, me, Robert Meyer Burnett, and I am robcasting you imagination connoisseurs, you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity community. This is Robservations episode number 875. You know, we live in a strange world now with social media, how we're all interconnected, especially when it comes to celebrity culture. And I feel like, you know, the old 6 degrees of separation between you and Kevin Bacon game, 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. I feel like, in a way, we're all 6 degrees away from whoever it is we want to talk to. And on one hand, that's a great way to be. It's really interesting that, you know, if you have the right approach and you or have a reasonably good head on your shoulders, you can pretty much reach out and find anyone that you want to. And if your approach is correct, you can maybe talk to them. One of the things that I've found great about living in Los Angeles for the last 35 years, I emigrated here from Seattle in 1988, was when I was at USC, there were various events that I would go to, Cinema 480 at Norris, which was a class, or I was a member of the Academy of Science Fiction, Fantasy, and Horror Films, Dr. Donald A. Reed's Academy, and his right-hand man, Robert Holguin, and I was involved with the Academy for a number of years in various capacities. But there were many people that came down, and filmmakers that were very generous with their time because of Dr. Reed, and they would hang out, and they would speak, and you could talk to them and meet them and pick their brains. And one of those people that the first year I was here, I actually ended up meeting twice, was William Friedkin. And William Friedkin was one of my favorite directors, very influential in terms of what I look for in film. You know, you hear me bang on about the word verisimilitude. And, you know, to be fair, I think the first time I ever heard that, I'd heard that word before, but I'd read it, but I had never seen it spoken until the documentary, the Superman, the movie documentary that Richard Donner's in, and there was a super shirt that had the word verisimilitude, and Superman was flying. And, you know, the idea of the quality of being real is really what verisimilitude means. And in terms of cinema, the way I choose to understand the word and the way I use it is the quality of how real is what you're watching on screen. And when you think about it, making a movie look real is not easy. Everything in the frame is being put there. So in order to create, I mean, even the camera placement has a function in terms of making you believe what you're seeing on screen. And my favorite movies are those movies that have what I call peak verisimilitude. And one of the most able practitioners of this was William Friedkin. And William Friedkin, the movies that he made in the early 70s, so he had made 3 feature films before he made The French Connection. Believe it or not, his first feature that William Friedkin made was Good Times, the Sonny and Cher movie. Then he made a movie called The Birthday Party, and he made The Night They Raided Minsky's, and certainly this was groundbreaking. The Boys in the Band in 1970, which was a play about gay men that were friends, and he made a movie of that in 1970. And Friedkin never shied away from LGBTQ issues. Some would say that he exploited them, but I beg to differ. And then, of course, in 1971, he made his film The French Connection that garnered him an Oscar. And before he did that, well, you know what, perhaps I should read The Hollywood Reporter, I got to hand it to them, had a really terrific obituary, if an obituary can be terrific, of William Friedkin. I'd like to read it because I thought they did a fine job of wrapping up his career. It's a little long, but I'd like to share it with you, only because William Friedkin was such a favorite of mine, and he deserves it. So here is the editorial, written by Stephen Galloway, and it was published at 9:44 a.m. this morning. William Friedkin, acclaimed director of The French Connection and The Exorcist, dies at 87. William Friedkin, the Oscar winner behind The French Connection and The Exorcist, who was one of the most admired directors to emerge from a wave of brilliant filmmakers who made their mark in the 1970s, died Monday. He was 87. Friedkin died of heart failure and pneumonia at his home in Bel Air. His wife, former producer and studio head Sherry Lansing, announced. She actually produced Fatal Attraction, then went on to run Paramount. His pictures, which also included Sorcerer, To Live and Die in L.A., Bug, were marked by an exceptional visual eye, a willingness to take what might have been a genre subject and treat it with high seriousness, and a sense of how sound could add a subterranean layer of dread, mystery, and dissonance to his stories, a haunted and haunting quality that lifted his visceral works into another realm, conveying a preternatural sense of fear and paranoia, both old friends of mine, as he said in his 2013 memoir, The Friedkin Connection. He was part of a brilliant generation of filmmakers who upended the studio system, making movies that were provocative, individualistic, and anti-authoritarian. Several of its members at one time joined forces to create the Directors Company in an attempt to give themselves the independence they cherished. Though internal disagreements led to its dissolution, not after they had collectively turned down Star Wars, not long after. One might debate who amongst these Helmers was the most talented, but not even the bravest of them could rival the Chicago native's willingness to tilt at the establishment. When Alfred Hitchcock told him off for not wearing a tie on the set of he had hired the young filmmaker in 1965 for an episode of NBC's The Alfred Hitchcock Hour, Friedkin got his revenge, so Hitchcock told him off for not wearing a tie. The night he won the Directors Guild Award for The French Connection, passing Hitchcock on his way from the podium, he yanked his snap-on bow tie and quipped, "How do you like the tie, Hitch?" It would have surprised Hitchcock that Friedkin revered the master's work, as he did that of Orson Welles, whose Citizen Kane he saw for the first time when he was 25. A true cineast, he in turn was revered by a younger generation. Indeed, shortly before Damien Chazelle became the youngest director to win an Oscar for La La Land, he made a pilgrimage to Friedkin's home high up in Bel Air just to meet the filmmaker. Even in a work that might have been a B-movie with another Helmer, Friedkin could dazzle with his skill and originality. The Exorcist, one of his most admired films, begins in a Middle Eastern desert where an old man stumbles through an archaeological site toward a hole where something, who knows what, has arrested others' attention. The sequence is terrifying, not just because of its desaturated images and the naturalistic performances that capture the heat, sweat, and humidity of the locale, but also because of a soundtrack which a buzzing, insistent sound, reminiscent of flies, perhaps the Lord of Flies himself, grows ever louder and more menacing. It is either ironic that neither Friedkin nor William Peter Blatty, author of the novel on which the movie was based, regarded this as a horror story, but rather as a drama. to be as fully and richly explored as any other. Friedkin remained fascinated with the subject his entire life and returned to it for his final film, a documentary about which the oldest living exorcist, The Devil and Father Amorth, in which he personally manned the camera during an exorcism. That's not his final film. His final film is actually a filmed version of Herman Wouk's play, The Caine Mutiny. What is it? Yes, The Caine Mutiny Court Martial, based on Herman Wouk's play that's more contemporized. That is his final film, and it will be debuting at the Venice Film Festival. The French Connection, which won Friedkin his Oscar, could equally have been a routine potboiler. Instead, it turns the bitter cold of a New York winter into a presence as tangible as the evil spirit in The Exorcist. Inescapable for the film's anti-heroes, two New York City detectives played by Gene Hackman and Roy Scheider as they pass through an urban empire littered with debris and human detritus, one almost indistinguishable from the other. Evil lurks in these mean streets just as much in the elegant home inhabited by the 12-year-old Regan in The Exorcist. Good and bad intrigued Friedkin, but in many of his films a blurred line existed between them, and what separated his heroes from his villains was often their intentions rather than their specific actions. The character Hackman plays in The French Connection horrified the actor, even though he was based on a real-life detective, and Friedkin had to push him ferociously to get him to portray the man in all of his rough-and-tumble bullying and bigoted ways. A deep pessimism suffused his work. Even The Exorcist and The French Connection, his most commercial films, end not in triumph, but in partial failure, with the death of a young priest in one and the escape of the narcotics mastermind in the other, even though he was witty, funny, and engaged in life right to the end. His film's ethical complexity showed them to be cut from the same cloth as Chinatown by Roman Polanski, The Godfather by Francis Ford Coppola, and The Last Detail by Hal Ashby. Some of the other masterworks of the 1970s, all of which grew out of the cynicism bred by the Vietnam War and later deepened by Watergate. There he is. William Friedkin was born in Chicago on August 29, 1935. The only child of a former nurse who he called a saint and a father who hopped between jobs, a man who seemed to have no sense of purpose except day-to-day survival. Both came from Jewish families that had fled Ukraine during the pogroms of the early 20th century. The family was poor and at one time subsisted on welfare, but Friedkin wrote, "I never knew it. All my friends lived the same way. Growing up among them, he had no knowledge of books, film, music, or even morality. The guys I hung with, like me, had no moral compass," he wrote in The Friedkin Connection. "I literally didn't know the difference between right and wrong." After graduating from Senn High School in 1953, Friedkin replied to an ad posted by a local TV station looking for someone to work in the mailroom. He showed up at the wrong station, but it was the best thing that could have happened. He was hired by WGN, where he fell under the wing of a kindly writer and columnist, Fran Coughlin, who recognized his talent and opened his eyes to a larger universe of art and artists, teachers, and politicians. Promoted to floor manager, Friedkin soon became a director of live television, earning the then unimaginable sum of $200 per week. His next break came when he met a prison chaplain at a local soiree. The man told him about Paul Crump, a death row inmate he believed to be innocent, but who was scheduled for execution in 6 months. The documentary Friedkin subsequently made about him, The People vs. Paul Crump from 1962, replete with a recreation of the alleged crime and a montage featuring the electric chair and a fever dream, not only led Crump to receive clemency, but also to a new career for Friedkin, who moved to Los Angeles and started making documentaries for David Wolper. Working for the famed producer, Friedkin learned to abandon pretense in favor of clarity. He was fearless, even reckless, in his attempts to create excellent work. Seeking to win over the subject of one documentary, he agreed to let the man's son shoot a cigarette out of his mouth from 50 paces, wishing to make a behind-the-scenes circus story come to life. He stepped into a cage with a lion tamer who would later be mauled to death by one of the cats. Leaving Wolper, Friedkin made his Hitchcock Hour episode Off-Season about a big city cop played by John Gavin who innocently kills the wrong man, and from there landed his first feature, Good Times, in 1967, starring Sonny and Cher. He deemed the former one of the few geniuses he'd ever met, even though the musical comedy flopped. The other three other features followed, each in a different style and genre: the Harold Pinter adaptation, The Birthday Party, the burlesque comedy, The Night They Raided Minsky's, and The Boys in the Band, one of the first mainstream movies to center on a gay cast. Each bombed, and the once promising Helmer appeared to be floundering, until he met Phil D'Antoni in the storied Paramount Steam Room. D'Antoni, the producer of the Steve McQueen thriller Bullet, had just optioned a book about two real-life New York City police detectives who had busted an international heroin ring. Friedkin read it and was unimpressed, but when he met the cops, he was transfixed. Their salty personalities, their willingness to use dubious methods in the pursuit of justice, their wisecracking and obsessive commitment to their work fascinated him. Friedkin signed on. 2 years later, after being turned down by every studio except one, he made The French Connection at 20th Century Fox on a budget of $1.5 million. After considering actors like Paul Newman, who was too expensive, and Jackie Gleason, too loathed at Fox, to play one of the cops, Jimmy Popeye Doyle, Friedkin cast Jimmy Breslin and spent several days working with him, only for the New York newspaperman to vanish. With a clock ticking, he reluctantly agreed to hire Hackman, with whom he fought constantly. The film's problems were compounded when the wrong actor showed up to portray the main villain, Alan Charnier. Friedkin had instructed someone on the team to get that guy who played the gangster in Buñuel's Belle de Jour. In a misunderstanding, Spanish actor Fernando Rey, a Louis Buñuel regular, was booked instead. Rey was suave, sophisticated, and anything but the gangster as Friedkin had envisioned him. I stared at the team member in disbelief, he recalled. I wanted to strangle him. I was convinced the film would be a disaster. Hackman was all wrong for Popeye, and no, God help us, they'd hired Fernando fucking Rey, who looked like a character out of a Greco painting. The casting, in fact, proved miraculous. It established a class conflict between the hero and villain to underline the drama. And so did the film, highlighted by arguably the most memorable chase sequence in movie history, when Doyle, in a heated pursuit of killer Pierre Nicoli, commandeers a Pontiac Le Mans and races through the narrow streets of Brooklyn to catch the guy riding in an overhead subway car. Friedkin himself operated a camera for the scene, almost killing a passerby as his car barreled from one block to another. Looking back, he said he was horrified at what he was willing to do for his art. Would not again risk the lives of others as we did, he noted. But the best moments of the chase came from this one long run with 3 cameras. Pedestrians and cars dashed out of the way, warned only by the oncoming siren. I put people's lives at risk. I say this more out of shame than pride. No film is worth it. Why did I do it? I shared the cop's obsession. Oh, I love that. I love this guy. He brought that same obsession to his next film, The Exorcist, an adaptation of William Peter Blatty's best-selling novel. Friedkin only got the job after other filmmakers, including Mike Nichols and Stanley Kubrick, had rejected it. Warner Brothers, meanwhile, was skeptical of a man who had a reputation for being difficult. There are times in the movie business when it pays to be thought of as a dangerously psychotic person, Friedkin explained. Blatty tried to cultivate that reputation, and on occasion, so did I. God bless you. Sorry, I just screwed that up, didn't I? Sorry, I missed what I was saying. Blatty tried to cultivate that reputation, and on occasion, so did I. The men shared the view that this was a unique and original story. I didn't see it as a horror film, quite the opposite. I read it as transcendent, as Blatty had intended. At first, Friedkin sought Audrey Hepburn to play the mother of Reagan, a prepubescent girl who becomes possessed by the devil. Hepburn agreed, but only if the picture were shot in Rome, where she lived with her husband. Anne Bancroft also wanted to do it, but she'd have to wait a year until she was available. Jane Fonda turned the role down flat. Why would anyone make this piece of capitalist rip-off bullshit, she asked. You go, Jane. In the end, Friedkin cast Ellen Burstyn and then Blair, a wide-eyed newcomer, as her daughter, with Lee J. Cobb, Max von Sydow, and Jason Miller rounding out the cast. Principal photography commenced in New York, where disaster followed disaster. The production went over budget, over schedule, A set was destroyed by fire, and at one point, when a non-professional actor, William O'Malley, struggled to find the right emotion as he performed last rites, Friedkin had to resort to extreme tactics, as he recounted in his memoir. Grasping the man by the shoulders, he asked, "Do you love me?" "Yes," said O'Malley, trembling. "Say it." "Yes, I love you, Billy. You know it," the man replied. Then I slapped him across the face as hard as I could and pushed him to his knees next to the prone body of Jason Miller. I called action. O'Malley burst into tears and performed the scene. The crew may have been shaken, but Warner's was thrilled. The Exorcist opened on December 26, 1973, and went on to become one of the biggest box office successes of all time. In 2000, the studio issued a re-edited version with 15 minutes added back in. When Friedkin returned to the subject with a sympathetic portrait of the oldest living exorcist, Gabriel Amorth, in The Devil and Father Amorth, he never doubted the authenticity of what he saw. The Exorcist should have marked the beginning of decades of success for the filmmaker, but his career had peaked. His next feature, his personal favorite, Sorcerer, a gritty adaptation of the Henri Georges Clouzot thriller The Wages of Fear, about renegades attempting to drive 2 truckloads of nitroglycerin through the South American jungle, flopped. As Friedkin noted, it would be years before I would again experience the same self-confidence on a film set, a belief in a kind of divine intervention. He continued to work regularly, but never with the same financial results. His later pictures included Cruising, which caused huge controversy because of its negative depiction of a gay S&M world, leading to attacks by members of the LGBTQ community that once had lauded the boys in the band, as well as Deal of the Century, To Live and Die in L.A., Blue Chips, and The Rules of Engagement. Friedkin also turned to other avenues of creativity, most notably as an internationally admired director of operas and in television, earning an Emmy nomination in 1998 for his remake of 12 Angry Men, starring Jack Lemmon for Showtime. In his late 70s, he experienced the thrill of having a cult classic with Killer Joe, based on a play by Tracy Letts, the Pulitzer Prize-winning playwright he discovered off-Broadway. In 2006, Friedkin had directed Bug from a Letts screenplay. Killer Joe was classic Friedkin, as The Guardian noted, a marriage of extreme lurid material with tightly controlled aesthetic rigor. It was also a marvelous resurrection for a man who had long since moved from the epicenter of Hollywood power, a sweet return to critical acclaim for a filmmaker who knew the highs and lows of fame and fortune. Friedkin was wry about his missteps and mistakes, remembering how he tossed a Basquiat drawing in the trash and turned down the chance to direct a video for Prince. He noted, "I've burned bridges and relationships to the point that I consider myself lucky to still be around. I never played by the rules, often to my own detriment. I've been rude, exercised bad judgment, squandered most of the gifts God gave me, and treated the love and friendship of others as I did Basquiat's art and Prince's music." When you are immune to the feelings of others, can you be a good father, a good husband, a good friend? Do I have regrets? You bet. He blamed his own hubris for the fall from grace, but had no bitterness about it, and in person twinkled with joy, especially in his later years following his July 1991 marriage to Sherry Lansing, who survives him, as do his sons Jack Friedkin and film editor Cedric Nairn-Smith. He was earlier married to actress Jean Moreau and Leslie Ann Down, and to newscaster Kelly Lang. His most recent work was a new version of The Caine Mutiny, which has been accepted to the Venice Film Festival, which begins this month. Throughout his career, he never lost his passion for the work. "I haven't made my Citizen Kane," he acknowledged in his autobiography, but there's but there's more work to do. I don't know how much, but I am loving it. Stephen Galloway is the dean of the Chapman University Film School. I figured, I would read that whole thing. Sorry I didn't do the best job reading that today. I don't know why, but what can I do? I got to meet Mr. Friedkin twice early on when I first moved to LA because of the academy and also at USC. He was very kind with his time, especially for students. He came to USC a lot, and he spoke and he showed his work, and he was very open and warm and wanted to take pictures, and he would answer any questions you may have. And he was really one of the first directors that I was in awe of that I met, especially when I moved to LA. And I was surprised about how approachable he'd become. And it was interesting to me because, here was a guy that, like it said in the article, arguably he peaked in the early 70s after French Connection and Exorcist. Sorcerer, which I think is a marvelous movie, was buried in the wake of Star Wars being released. And I think it really hurt him. It was his passion project. He worked on it for a very long time. It was a remake of The Wages of Fear, and he worked so hard on the film, and it didn't do very well. And unfortunately, after that, the movies that he made, they said in the article, they were not always well received. After Sorcerer, which came out in 1977, he made The Brink's Job, which was a story about, indeed, the Brink's Job. And to be fair, I kind of liked The Brink's Job. Waylon Green, as in Wild Bunch Waylon Green, wrote it. Peter Falk, Peter Boyle, Alan Garfield, Warren Oates, Gina Rollins, Paul Sorvino. I mean, it had some really great cast members in it. And, it was based on the book, The Big Stick Up at Brink's. And, it was okay. It wasn't great, but it was a lot of fun. And I think his documentary sensibilities worked for the film. Then he made Cruising, which he did run afoul of the gay community in New York because he was telling a story about really seedy murders in the gay underworld. Now, I'll tell you this is a very funny story. My father took me to see Cruising. The reason my father took me to see Cruising was my father insured Jerry Weintraub, the producer, who was one of the producers of the film. And my dad had no idea what the movie was about. He didn't know what cruising meant. He thought it was probably a car thing. So my dad thought it was really, really cool that he was going to be able to take me to this movie premiere. And he's like, Al Pacino's in it. And it's a cop thriller or something. And my dad and I went. Now, I liked it. I thought it was pretty interesting. And I'm like, it was the first time I'd ever really glimpsed the hardcore leather daddy, bear, whatever you want to call it, subculture. And I thought it was fascinating. It was like looking at an alien culture. And my dad, I'm sure, was suitably embarrassed. And but I didn't have questions for him because, I'd been reading horror novels and I'd read some pretty questionable things. So I got what was going on, but I found the storyline and the presentation pretty amazing. And then I found something out when I was at USC that I could not believe. I could not believe this. And Friedkin told the story at USC. He said, when the murders happen in Cruising, he said he showed the ratings board the murders forward and back. And the ratings board did not have a problem with anything that was in those murders. Close-ups of the knives going in. He was showing it to us, and we were like, okay. I knew there was something up, but I didn't understand what. And he said, he said, when during the murders, the knife going in is intercut with close-ups of anal intercourse between men. And I was like, get out of town. There's no way. And I went and rented the tape. I had to go rent the VHS tape. And sure enough, there's no hiding it. There's nothing. You slow that stuff down and bam, it's right there. Released full on in the theater. Now, when you play the movie at normal speed, it just looks like, it's a stylized penetration of a knife. It's stylized and it's penetration all right, but wow. He got away with it. And I think he thought that was pretty cool. And then he made the sort of anti-war kind of, I don't know if it was Strange Lovian Deal of the Century movie that didn't really work. As a comedy, it didn't work. Chevy Chase, Sigourney Weaver. One of the interesting things about Deal of the Century is Paul Brickman, who later went on to make Risky Business and Men Don't Leave, was one of the writers on the script. And it had Gregory Hines in it. Richard Hurd was in it. Wallace Shawn was in it. It didn't work. It really didn't work, and it didn't do well either. But hey, he made it. And then after that, he left Warner Brothers, and he directed a Laura Branigan music video. and he went on and he made To Live and Die in L.A., which was sort of independently financed. But before he made To Live and Die in L.A., or it might have been after, he directed a fantastic episode of The Twilight Zone, Phil Daguerre's mid-'80s Twilight Zone revival. And it was an adaptation of Robert McCammon's short story Nightcrawlers. And I'm sure it's on YouTube. It's 20 minutes. It's a great piece of television. And it was a great episode of the new Twilight Zone. So I highly recommend you all check it out. So he did that. And I'm sure, I mean, I don't know what it was like for him to go back to TV and direct a 20-minute episode of a Twilight Zone revival, but he certainly didn't phone it in. It was fantastic. And then, of course, To Live and Die in L.A. came out in '85. He did a Barbra Streisand music video for Somewhere. And then he did Putting It Together, the making of the Broadway album. Then he directed 2 TV movies, Cat Squad and Cat Squad Python Wolf. And then he made another low-budget serial killer movie called Rampage. It was interesting. Not great, but it was interesting. And then he made a movie he doesn't even talk about in his autobiography, The Guardian. And The Guardian was a Universal horror movie. And I actually kind of liked it. And I met him another time and talked to him about it. And he was not a fan of this movie and didn't like to talk about it. But he had a pretty decent cast, and he worked with Natalia Nogalich, who is Admiral Nechayev in Star Trek. He knew her from back in Chicago. So, hey, what are you going to say? It was based on another horror novel called The Nanny, but hey, work's work, and Billy's got to eat. So I understand. He didn't like to talk about that, but I kind of like the movie, and sure, I have it on Blu-ray, although it could use a remastering. And then, of course, when Sherry Lansing took over at Paramount, he was able to go make movies at Paramount. He made Blue Chips, he made Jade, he made Rules of Engagement, and The Hunted there for about a decade. And then he worked in the 12 Angry Men movie, and he directed 2 episodes of CSI, and then he made Bug, the Tracy Letts duology, and Killer Joe, and Killer Joe's great. But what I loved about him was his verisimilitude, and my first experience watching his work was The Exorcist. And I was 13 years old. I got a VCR for my bar mitzvah, and The Exorcist was one of the first tapes that I got. Now, I'd wanted to see The Exorcist since I was 7 years old or 6 years old, listening to the radio ads for the movie. And the first R-rated movie I ever saw, if you can imagine, and how disappointed I was Exorcist II: The Heretic. So I had actually seen Exorcist II: The Heretic before I'd seen The Exorcist. And I took The Exorcist home from Video Space and Magnolia Hi-Fi on Bellevue Way, and I waited up till midnight to watch The Exorcist. And the Iraq scene that Mr. Galloway talked about in his obit, I couldn't get past it. The just this guy, Father Merrin rummaging around in Iraq, and the sound design, I'd never seen anything like it. My 13-year-old brain, I was terrified by that opening Iraq sequence. And nothing even really happens. It's just the tone of it. And that's where I fell in love with the idea of verisimilitude. It was, the reality of it, the way that it was able to it killed me. Just killed me. And it was truly an amazing sequence, and I was just scared to death. And I turned it off after the Iraq scene was over. I didn't even get to Georgetown. I didn't even get to Washington, D.C. So I saved it, and then the next day I got up. It was a Saturday, and I waited until like noon, and I put it on, and my love affair with William Friedkin began. And seeing The Exorcist, I think I watched it like 3 times that weekend. And it was, subsequently I've seen it in the theater many, many times. And it's my favorite horror movie of all time because of its ability to create a reality. I mean, it's terrifying. Even the sound of X-rays being put up and looked at, really, really terrifying. And he was the master. He was the master at it. And over the years, I used to love to hear him whenever he'd show up at screenings, and we had a few exchanges on Twitter. He was a really great guy, and so many of his films mean so much to me. French Connection, obviously Exorcist, Sorcerer, To Live and Die in L.A. being the four. But I love Killer Joe. I love Bug. I even like Blue Chips quite a bit. It was interesting because, like he said, he was kind of a enfant terrible in his younger days. He definitely had an ego on him. But why not? I think that perhaps he did burn a lot of those bridges, which is why he was never able to really achieve more than Sorcerer. But still, I mean, when To Live and Die in L.A. came out, I loved it so much the first time I saw it. And it was criticized. It didn't do badly. I mean, it was a $6 million movie that made like $17 million, which seems silly now, but the movie was only $6 million, so it tripled its... It wasn't an expensive movie, and Rampage wasn't either. But people criticized To Live and Die in L.A. because even the heroes, you don't like them. And I'm like, that's what I love about the movie. Talk about morally ambiguous. I loved it. But, it sort of brings up this weird, like I was talking about celebrity culture. Like, I wasn't friends with William Friedkin. I couldn't call him on the phone or invite him out to lunch. But I felt like I knew him a little bit. But it's strange when somebody dies. I mean, I'm glad he got to make a final movie. But it's weird in this day and age. You think you know people, and somebody's work has meant so much to you in your whole life, and then you realize they're gone. He's 87 years old. He lived a great life. His marriage with Sherry Lansing worked. He was with her for quite a bit of time, so I wish that Sherry Lansing and her family the best in this difficult time. But he had a great life, and he has a great legacy to leave behind, and I was happy that at least I got to interact with him personally on a number of occasions. But it is sort of a strange thing in this world where we can know celebrities. It's a bizarre. And so when they're gone, it's like to know that, like, he has a movie coming out. It's going to be in Venice. The Caine Mutiny Court Martial, and it will come out and people will watch it after he's shuffled off this mortal coil. And that's kind of an interesting thing to think about. I'm just glad that we have a world where someone like him lived. And for me, when I was 13 years old and plopped The Exorcist into my VCR for the first time, from the opening minutes of that movie, the man scared the hell out of me. And I was overjoyed with delight that he did so. So I'm happy I got to know him. I'm happy I got to know his work. And I think we're all better for it. So that's what I wanted to say. Nothing really profound. I just, his movies meant a lot to me, obviously, to finally have received To Live and Die in L.A. and then to lose Friedkin himself mere weeks later is a little strange. But I guess I can watch it again. But it's great that we were able to have his work, and we can be touched by it, I suppose. Swift sends in a super chat. By the way, if you want to send in a super chat today, I notice it's been wonky. I would use the tip feature only because I have to reconnect something. It's bizarre. I don't know why. This has been happening for the last couple days. But I don't want anyone to lose their super chats. So if you want to use, you don't have to use the tip feature, but I'm just saying the tip feature might be better just for today. Swift 718 says, you were just talking about William Friedkin yesterday on Let's Get Physical Media. So sad. Rest in peace. Thanks for the impactful work. Yes, he certainly did. I mean, his work was the fact that is he never gave up. He never just said, my life is over. He kept making movies literally up until the very end. And, that's what you do. You pick yourself up off the ground, you dust yourself off, and you keep going. That's all anybody can do. And he did. So from that perspective, he was certainly an inspiration. In addition to his work being an inspiration, he, the man, was an inspiration. Drew, with Comics Elite, said, having a double feature tonight of Sorcerer and To Live and Die in L.A. Sorcerer, I think it's a masterpiece few people have seen and could be forgotten. It is. And Sorcerer's a fantastic movie, and he had the foresight to use Tangerine Dream to score it. The theme for Sorcerer is one of my favorites of all time, and they killed it. Garrick Groover says, besides The French Connection and Sorcerer, what other Friedkin movies would you like to see get a 4K release? Well, we got To Live and Die in L.A. We're getting The Exorcist. I'd love to get Killer Joe on 4K. I'd love to get Bug on 4K. Cruising. I mean, there have been some good remasters of Cruising, and maybe Rampage. Hell, all of them. I'd really love somebody to remaster The Guardian, too, because it looks like they took it off of a print. It's not good. They need to remaster The Guardian. Maybe somebody will. 200 Watt Studio says, a great loss to film and an era of film storytelling that is so sorely missed today. He was a unique character and talent with a particular voice. It's very true. 200 Watt Studio goes on to say, Sorcerer and The French Connection are my favorite Friedkin films. Incredible hubris of having a wrong-way car chase on an LA highway was white-knuckle amazing. Yeah, it's incredible. I mean, To Live and Die in L.A., I love To Live and Die in L.A. I love the morally ambiguous nature of our heroes. I love the amorality of it all. I love that Steve James is in it. What are you doing in my crib? Now you be a printer. Go get some ink. Start printing some more of that shit. I love Steve James. If you knew him, he worked with Michael Dudikoff in American Ninja. And the fact that Friedkin cast him was great. Nicomedes Santiago says, Friedkin, great filmmaker, film enthusiast, plain speaker, and later in life, infectiously hilarious raconteur. What a director. What a guy. What a life. P.S. Cruising. I loved it then and now. I couldn't agree with you more because it's so fantastic. And it really is fantastic. So, yeah, I mean, I'm looking forward to seeing The Court Martial. What's interesting about his new movie is apparently while it's based on the Herman Wouk play, they've updated it. So I think it takes place during the Gulf War. So, and Kiefer Sutherland plays Queeg, and Jason Clarke plays Barney Greenwald, and Jake Lacey is Stephen Merrick, which I think is really interesting. And Monica Raymond plays Commander Catherine Chalet, which is interesting. And Lance Reddick, in one of his last roles, it must be, Captain Luther Blakely. Man, that's really cool. I didn't realize that was Lance Reddick was in that. That's amazing. So there's a couple of really interesting actors in here that, wow. Oh, I can't wait to see that. And Dale Dye, Vice Admiral R.T. Dewey, Gunny. Dale Dye, who's been a military advisor on a lot of movies. Apocalypse Now, and you've seen him in a number of things. That's cool. Dale Dye and Lee Ermey. It's good to see that Dale Dye's in there. That's very, very cool. So, yeah. Tom Jr. Jackson says that Friedkin's commentary on Vertigo is a masterclass on film. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the great things about Friedkin. He was a huge cineast, and listening to him talk about movies was really, really, really great. So, yeah, it's great to have had him, and you know, I'm sad that he's gone. I really am, because you know, I thought about him a lot, and when I was even making Free Enterprise, like, how do you, whenever I talk or think about Verisimilitude, he's the first person that comes to mind, and I just, you know, I loved what he could do. Yeah, and he's no longer with us, which is a bummer. So, but on that note, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, I just wanted to recognize William Friedkin. It's not a long one tonight. I just felt I couldn't let his passing go, being that he's meant so much to me in my life. So I wanted to just get on here and give a little bit of a remembrance to Hurricane Billy, as they called him on set. And, you know, we're going to be losing more and more of our masters. And it's too bad. I mean, that's just the way of the world, and I understand that. But when they're gone, they're gone. So 200 Watt Studio, says Tom Jr. Jackson brings up his commentary. Friedkin's commentaries on any film is always an intellectual treat. You know what though? Sometimes his commentary on To Live and Die in L.A. is great, but sometimes he would tend to describe things on the screen more often than offer stuff. This was his own films. He was great about talking about other people's films, but yeah, his commentary for To Live and Die in L.A. was great. But so listen, everyone, I'm gonna wrap this one up. I just want to say I felt it kind of. I've been sort of sad all day, but I wanted to just give a shout out and a remembrance to William Friedkin because he meant a lot to me, and his work has meant a lot to me. And if you're interested in what I would say is his definitive filmography, the movies that you should watch by him, you should probably watch The Boys in the Band. Then you should watch French Connection, of course, Exorcist, yes, Sorcerer, of course, Cruising, I would watch, To Live and Die in L.A., Blue Chips, The Hunted, and Bug, and Killer Joe. And also, if you want to right now, go find on YouTube the Nightcrawlers episode of The Twilight Zone. Check that out. So I want to thank you all for being here. I want to thank everybody for generously supporting the channel via Super Chats and tips. I want to thank Tom Jr. Jackson for moderating this, and I will be back tomorrow with a longer one. I'm trying to put together a pretty interesting panel discussion on the strike and where we're at. So, yeah. And, of course, everybody buy The Exorcist when it comes out in 4K, no matter if it has that horrible American cover or not. But, yeah. So, on that note, remember, every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear. And all you have to do is listen. And with that, I'd say to all of you, have a better day.